I figure I should start this video where I've been leaving off the last few. What in the world my hormone situation is. Unfortunately, it's something that hasn't gotten much better. In fact, I went through about 4 different blood tests in the span of maybe 6 weeks, which I'm used to only having them once every 3 months, so that really shows you how extreme this is. It's not life-threatening by any means, but just doesn't make any sense. I had to drive a little bit to go see my endocrinologist to get a physical exam, as well as just try to figure out some other theories for this. Well, we did definitely get the physical exam, and yeah, it's a little invasive, more so than when they would give us physicals back in junior high school. But thankfully, nothing cancerous has been found, so that's good. But we still don't really know what's going on. Been on this regimen for about 2.5 years now, and then all of a sudden my body seems to be wanting to take revenge upon me. So we're going to try a new T blocker and see where it goes. It's annoying for a multitude of reasons. I'm sure I've mentioned it in other videos, but yeah, it just doesn't feel like there's a whole lot of physical progress. But this month, there was a lot of mental progress. So I'm going to be doing a lot of bouncing around across various subjects and even various days in this month. So, let's get started. Probably the biggest thing I did this month was a consultation for bottom surgery. That was quite a ride. It was about 3 hours away from my house, which I was driving through on and off snowstorms along the way. I'm happy I was able to make it there on time. However, I was getting a little nervous, as when I got there, I found out that my appointment was scheduled for 2:30, and I got there at about 11:20. There was a mix-up because my endocrinologist scheduled an appointment that same day, but at 12:30. So I naturally assumed that 12:30 was the time for the consultation. I am very grateful that they were able to see me pretty quickly, actually, despite the fact that I was about 3 hours early. But I could definitely say that consultation really put things into perspective. It's something that's kind of scary. I'm not gonna lie. There's so many different things that could go wrong. It's a very sensitive part of the body, and if you cut outside the lines a little too much, you could be stuck with a lot of issues. But the one that stuck with me the most was the idea that if somehow the colon gets into problems after surgery, well, let's just say that I would have to find another means of exit for a few more months, and yeah, out of all the side effects, that one felt the most terrifying. Because not only would it add a lot more to the recovery, but I'm sure the equipment to be able to do such things wouldn't be so cheap either. One of the other big complications as well is, right after surgery, you're not allowed to move for about 3 days. And that much immobility can lead to some very nasty blood clots. So about every morning, they're gonna hit me with some sort of blood thinner afterwards. And just hope that I won't have some sort of clot of any kind, because that could do some really bad things. But for all the doom and gloom, and even me kind of having second thoughts about it, there were actually quite a few nice things I got out of it. So the biggest one is that this surgeon was not requiring me to rid the area of hair first. Which, on one hand, I'm like, hey, that's gonna make it so I can get in about 6 months earlier. But then I realize, after said surgery, there's gonna be no way to remove that hair afterwards. So, that was my thought process is, basically, I want to take it real slowly. First, I'm going to clear the brush, harvest the berries, and then finally take out the dead wood. Or at least that's generally what my plan is. It's all over the place as to whether I can harvest the berries first, or if the berries have to be harvested when I'm clearing the dead wood. It's all over the place, and such research is still being in development, obviously. And the other big thing as well I took away, so the first surgeon I went through a consultation with said that after such a surgery, I would have to stay within like a 15-mile radius of the hospital for an entire month. This surgeon is not requiring that. If I'm not healthy enough to leave the hospital, it's just going to keep me in the hospital longer. And then, after like a week or so, I can go home and do my recovery from there. However, there's obviously going to be a fair bit of back and forth just to make sure everything's doing alright. And I guess that is something that is a little scary, is the idea that if somehow I had an emergency, would I be able to hold out for that 3-hour drive? So, let's just say generally that was a very humbling experience. I feel very much like the boulder. I'm very conflicted about this because it's something that I still want, but now I've got a really healthy dose of fear to go with it. And so, part of me is wondering if I'll ever be able to find that courage, but I think more or less it's just going to turn into irritation because the longer I'm stuck with this thing, the more I can't stand it. So we were on break at work when a coworker is just scrolling through Facebook. When in his feed, he spots this picture of an old friend. This picture was somewhere from the 80s. It was somewhat Christmas related. And he just immediately stopped and he wanted me to see it. And he's like, "Do you know who that is?" I'm looking at the picture and I'm like, "I'm afraid I don't recognize her." And he's just like, "She looks just like you." Luckily, he had like a little mirror around, so I was able to kind of compare it, and yeah, I was able to see a little bit of a resemblance. So that picture started to go around, and everybody agreed that it looked just like me, which made me very happy. The idea that I look like a woman. That means that I'm succeeding. Everything is going properly. But even more interesting than that, in her profile picture also showed what she looks like now. Like I said, this picture was taken sometime in the 80s, and that was about 40 years ago. And it gave me a little bit of a snapshot as to what I may look like in the future, and I still look pretty good. So in the evenings, I like to watch a lot of YouTube. I don't really get cable, I just have antenna because I'm a relatively cheap person, and a lot of people know this about me. But anyway, one evening I came across this trans VTuber. I'm sure I'm going to mess up her name, so I'm just going to put it on the screen now. One of the videos I saw from her was just kind of a brief overview of what it's going to be like if you go on hormone replacement therapy. I've often toyed with the idea of wanting to make such a video myself. However, it was meant to be more of like a parody of like the old school puberty video, but obviously it never went anywhere, and I think this VTuber did it a lot better than I could have. And there was a few takeaways I got from that video. At the very end, she said during years 4 through 5, hopefully you'll kind of stop and reflect about the experience that you've had along the way, rather than just holding your breath, waiting for it to finally be over. And this is something I've struggled with a lot in my experience. I'm a person that very much thinks ahead. I'm more concentrated on what's next rather than what I've accomplished so far. And that's one of the reasons why I like hearing other people's story in transitioning, because it kind of takes me back to the time that they were in. It reminds me that, oh yeah, I was at this stage as well, wasn't I? Or this is how I handled the situation. And just the general idea of remembering that I'm transitioning, and it's a nice thing to just kind of stop and smell the roses every so often. One of the other big things I loved about the video is the VTuber's just like, hey, you're further along, why don't you do the things that you would think most cis women would do anyway? And that was just such an interesting thought. In the back of my mind, I've had a list of things that I've wanted to do, and at this point, I've mostly accomplished them. The only thing missing is the stereotypical sleepover, but I don't think adults really do that anymore. I could theoretically do it online, but I feel like that would kind of be missing the point. Probably the only other thing to mention on that particular subject is I feel a lot more comfortable around women. I might have mentioned this before, but when I was younger, women were utterly terrifying. It was all about this idea that, like, they're a very fragile thing. If you look at them wrong, they'll break. And if they break, you're going to jail. And so, terrifying. They were always so scary to me, but in becoming one, I'm just kind of like, we're all people. There's nothing for me to be afraid of. Although I will admit, there are definitely a few moments that I definitely can't relate. I guess the best way I can explain it is before I was very much a stranger in a strange land. And now I feel like a Spanish person visiting a Portuguese-speaking country. For the most part, I can get by, but there's just a few things that get lost in translation. So, I very much like this VTuber, and I wanted to see what else they had. And the two other big videos I watched from her were interviews with other trans women. The first one I liked in the idea that it's something that kind of tackled politics, but it didn't really demonize one side or the other, which is something that I've run into a lot in the trans community, and for a community that's all about love and acceptance, I'm starting to find that a lot of trans people have a very limited view as to what they will love and accept. But that video kind of gave me hope that maybe we can actually take away the differences and kind of get back to just being people again. And the other big one was a very tough story from a woman that transitioned in the 1980s, and wow, that was quite a downer, but it was almost uplifting in a ways. The idea that this woman was able to put up with being put in a mental institute at a very young age, her parents kind of saying, okay, that's enough, but as she started expressing herself more, she got kicked out of the house at the age of 14, where she basically just had to scrape by a living with prostitution. Luckily, she was able to carve a life for herself. It was a bit better, but I hear a story like that and I think two things. The first is, well, if she can put up with that, still be alive, and even kind of have a few happy memories along the way, then I can do the same. So I definitely did not face that many hardships. But the second thought I always have is it feels a little invalidating, as it's one of the same problems I had with my childhood. I knew I had a very bad childhood, but when I heard about other bad childhoods, it just didn't feel like I was in the same league anymore, and very much the same way with this story. However, I don't really think that was the point of it. But to try to lighten things up a little bit, so I may have mentioned that I briefly had a girlfriend on Discord. Well, we've kind of had our ups and downs, and, well, we've started to reconcile and even started talking to each other again. And it's a lot of fun. We just flirt with each other like crazy, which to me, I feel like flirting is like nice sarcasm, if that makes any sense. It feels very much like you're zinging someone, but in a lovely way. Like, one of the best ways I can do it is if somebody takes a picture of, say, a statue, and they're just like, "Ooh, that's beautiful." No, you're beautiful. That's very much my sense of flirting, I guess. But the most interesting thing about one of the conversations we had, we were talking about the ideas of like dating, sex, kissing, hugging, cuddling, all this other stuff. None of which either of us had ever done before. Which to me, I never thought I would ever run into this sort of thing. Because from how all the people talked when I was going through high school, it seemed like by the age of 18, you had sex with at least 5 people, you kissed at least 20, and you've been on like 150 dates already. I've never done any of these things. And that was always one of the reasons why I found dating rather intimidating. Because I'm just so far behind in the experience, but now I've found somebody that's in the same league as me, and it's almost kind of nice. It's like we can discover this together. We don't have a set of rules that we have to abide by. We can just make up our own rules. What do we like? What do we dislike? And then we can just go from there. And I guess the last thing I will mention as well, so I'm not sure how famous this guy is. The YouTube channel is known as One Topic at a Time. He occasionally likes to review trans memes as well as so many other things. But one of the videos I saw by him was another batch of trans memes. And one of them brings up the famous button scenario. So for those of you that don't know what the button scenario is it's something that's posed to somebody who's questioning if they're trans. It's like, if you press this button, you'll be the gender you want to be for the rest of your life, no strings attached. Do you press the button? However, this button had a bit of a twist. It was the idea that you could live as the gender that you want to be, but you have to go through middle school and deal with puberty the whole time. And I can definitely say I am not pressing that button. I mean, it's true. It'd be fantastic if I just went through the right puberty the first time and I didn't have to take artificial hormones in order to emulate such an experience. But at the same time, I don't want to go through periods, and I do not want the ability to get pregnant. I'm pretty sure I'm on the A spec, although the longer I transition, the more I realize sex isn't as disgusting as I thought it would be. But I always kind of enjoyed that position, that because I'm trans, I can enjoy female sex, but not have to worry about having a baby from it. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Christmas. During that time off, an uncle came in the town and he gave me this hat. And my aunt gave me money to also help with buying a new wardrobe, which is where I got this dress from. Flash the Christmas day. We're all at my parents' place enjoying a breakfast of bagels, waiting for that migration where we go to my aunt's house and celebrate Christmas that way. So we were just kind of waiting around when all of a sudden I realized I forgot to bring the gift I was supposed to bring for this big Christmas batch. Since things were slow, decided to go and pick up the gift. My uncle also wanted to come along with me for the ride. So it seems most of the family is abuzz after I mentioned going in for my consultation. A lot of people are taking this as a sign that I'm going to be having surgery real shortly. Which is something that I had to discredit right away, basically saying, I still want it, but it's kind of terrifying now, and it's hard to say when I'm going to be able to find the courage / the annoyance to be able to go through with it. But while we were driving, he wanted to ask me a few questions. And it seems like one of the big questions I always get next to, are you doing this legally, is, are you part of a support group? Well, I'm not sure if I mentioned it in this series I have, but I was temporarily in a support group. And it was fun while it lasted, but it ended so horribly that I have just been afraid to find any other ones to try to do it again. And obviously my uncle wants to know what's going on. It's just like, what happened there. And knowing him, I'm just like, I am definitely not telling him because I'm sure he would look down on me as a person afterwards. Unfortunately, that seems to happen a lot with that particular subject. So, I just don't feel like burning any more bridges. Along the way, he also wanted to talk about preferences, like what I would be looking for if I were to ever start dating. And this is something that I've put some thought into, but not a whole lot. But I think really the biggest thing is I like black hair, fair skin, and hey, if we were able to share quite a few hobbies, that'd be fantastic. If I could find a gamer girl that maybe likes anime and board games, I'd call her a keeper. But there is more to it than that. If we are going to get very serious, there's quite a few things I'm going to need them to be able to handle, and so far, I just haven't had very good luck with those particular aspects. And the other big thing that my uncle wanted to mention as well is the internet. He very much felt like he was alone before he found the internet, as he had quite a lot of obscure hobbies. And then he found groups online that very much shared those same hobbies, so he was able to make some friends and all that kind of stuff. For me, I feel like I've had a bit of the opposite problem. I mean, don't get me wrong, I've found people that have very similar interests to me: classic literature, anime, board games, video games, old sitcoms, VHS, stuff like that. But obviously, I haven't really found somebody that likes all of those things, and just like before. So it felt like the more I was on the internet, the more I feel unique, alone in a ways. Perhaps I'm just not looking in the right place. But then again, there's not really a whole lot of places for me to look in because I don't really want to start dating men, as I find women far more attractive. And on top of that, I feel like if I were to date a man, I'd be going back to where I was before. It feels like men have to constantly prove their manliness whenever, and so there's always a bit of a contest going on with them. While women, I feel like they're just kind of in all this together, and we're not really fighting over such things. Or at least that's the impression that I get. So as for the Christmas party itself, it went very well. I only ever heard my dead name twice, but the main thing is really gotta start honing in on those pronouns because, well, he, him is starting to get painful. And on top of that, my mother feels like she's almost allergic to the name, so she just refers to me as him. I am not the supervillain from the Powerpuff Girls. I am your daughter. Call me Julia, please. That's all I'm asking. But the two other biggest things to mention about that party was we started talking a little bit about makeup. And really the only thing I threw into that conversation is I get sticker shock real easily. And they were talking about a particular brand, and they were all in agreement. It's just like, yeah, makeup is not cheap. And the other thing is, we have an offshoot of the family that shows up to all the gatherings as well. But I haven't really seen them since I started transitioning. So we were kind of talking, and they even mentioned a little bit of the past when I was dead name. And after they told the story, they were just kind of like, oh yeah, that's who you used to be, but that's not who you are now. And they even called me by my correct name. And it was just interesting that I didn't have to tell them that. They knew. Everybody knows about me, and yeah, they might be taking a little bit to get used to it, but none of them are like offended by my mere presence, so I guess that's a win. So the very last thing to mention. So my mother gave me a rather expensive gift. This was not something I was particularly interested in, but I still wanted to be nice, took it anyway, and I thanked her for it. And after about maybe 10 minutes of just kind of holding the thing aside, she was really pressing me. "You want this thing?" And I'm like, "No." "You ever gonna use this thing?" "No." She's like, "Well, okay." It kind of worked out anyway because this was something she also wanted. She just gave me the cash that it was to be able to pick up this thing, and I had no idea it was as expensive as it was, but wow, with that money I was able to pick up a lot more articles of clothing, and I think I have finally gotten that new wardrobe. I just need to try to find more jackets and sweatshirts. That's really the only thing. But in terms of like t-shirts, pants, and all that good stuff, I'm good. Although one of these days I'm gonna have to try to find the courage to be able to buy and wear skirts. So the day after Christmas was a very interesting one to say the least. There were two major things I had to take care of that day. I had to renew my driver's license at the DMV, and I was going in for my first session of laser hair removal for the bikini zone. I'll leave it up to your imagination which one was more painful. I figure that'd be a fun little joke to start out with if I were to ever do stand-up in any ways. But surprisingly, the DMV trip was not all that bad. I got there at just the right time, so I was the second person in line. I was able to take care of everything in about an hour or so. Which, if anybody's gone to the DMV, you know how almost impossible that is. So as for the laser hair removal, the biggest thing that's so complicated about the whole thing is, in order for you to go through laser hair removal or electrolysis, you first have to shave the area first. Which, I gotta tell you, it's kind of a scary thing to do. I remember posing this question to other trans women. It's like, how do you do this? And it just amazes me how many people said, just a razor and shaving cream. That's very much how I used to shave my legs at the very beginning until I accidentally took out a chunk of flesh from them. I still have a scar from that to this day, actually. So, obviously that was not something I was going to do for such a sensitive area of the body with several major arteries leading to it. So I did as well as I could with an electric razor. However, even that was terrifying. But hey, maybe things would have worked out better if I went with today's sponsor, Manscaped. It's a razor that has skin-safe technology to prevent all kinds of nicks and tears commonly found in other manscaping accidents. I am sorry, I couldn't resist. However, if Manscaped wants to send me some sort of endorsement check, I wouldn't mind that. But in all seriousness, I gotta see if I can find a better razor because I did as well as I could, and the technician there is like, ugh, you've missed quite a few spots actually. And so, I was really happy that the laser hair technician was very professional about this. For her, it's just more skin that needs hair removed, and she's done this for several other trans women and even just cis men and women that don't want hair down there. And so, yeah, there were a few places where the razor she was using got stuck, but thankfully I didn't draw a whole lot of blood. And then on to the laser hair section, which I'm happy that she gave me two little sponge plushes for me to squeeze on because I definitely needed something to do with my hands. And the whole time I'm there, I just keep twitching and all this other stuff, and I'm like, I really apologize. But, as both of us agreed, it's a very sensitive area of the body, and it's just kind of a natural reflex. All in all, it went well, and surprisingly, it wasn't as painful as this. Obviously, after trying to burn several follicles in such a sensitive area of the body, you can bet that area was very tender for the next few days. Which for me meant that it was very slow moving whenever I walked, and it was also very difficult for me to sleep. So ordinarily, I fall asleep on my side, or even my stomach, surprisingly enough. But it's very hard for me to fall asleep on my back. I'm able to get in a nice relaxed state for sleep, but it's very hard for me to sleep that way. So, while everything was healing, it definitely took a little bit until I was back to be able to getting a good night's sleep again. And on top of that, I won't get too much into the details, but it is a very different feeling, especially when you're used to having that little buffer between you and you. And so it's a very different feeling, but in getting rid of all that hair, I've really learned to appreciate how bottom surgery can even be done. I mean, it just seems like such an easy thing to just kind of chop away if you wanted to. But surgery obviously is a lot more than that, because it wants to save the nerve endings. If I just wanted to remove the thing, that'd be pretty easy, but because I want to be able to have feeling down there, that is where it gets complicated. And the other big thing I will mention, it's been kind of a rumor going around that some people like to shave that downstairs because it makes their jingly bits look bigger. And unfortunately, I can very much agree with that statement. But at the same time, it's a pretty major step there, and while it is painful, it's almost like the same pain you would get from like a really intense workout. Like, yeah, you may regret it immediately the day after, but once you start seeing results, that is when you'll just stop worrying about the pain and just keep going. So this is the last subject I have. I just simply labeled it extras, as it felt more like a miscellaneous rather than fitting into any of the categories that I mentioned earlier. So the first major thing, I was driving home from work, had to fill up on some gas, when all of a sudden some guy about 2 pumps over just shouts to me, "Hey, has anybody ever told you how beautiful you are?" To which I had a little fun with him and said, "Not yet." And that was nice. Some people may consider that catcalling or whatever, but compared to the last time I've had that happen, this one felt genuinely sweet, rather than the creepy guy that followed me around and then gave me his business card. This one, he just threw a nice compliment, and I returned it in advance. I wanted to make sure to thank him, because I did not get dolled up in the least that day. Come to think of it, I probably could have added this next one under miscellaneous things I found on the internet, but I figured this was something I should keep separate. So, kind of a similar story as the 40-year-old photo. So a coworker was looking to buy a toy xylophone for his grandson, and he called me over and wanted me to take a look at it. I didn't really see anything wrong with it, as it's like, okay, well, it's rainbow colored, so you can teach notes as well as color rainbow, eh? He's probably thinking that he's going to be controlled because it might be a gay pride flag, so I just immediately went, no, it is not a gay pride flag. When I walked away, I was kind of laughing at the absurdity of the thing, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that there's quite a fair bit of implications there. This is something a lot of people think, that this sort of thing is a very contagious disease, and being too close to it, you're gonna catch the gay, you're gonna catch the trans, you're gonna catch the queer. That is not how this works at all. And in all honesty, if you can be taken in that easily, you can easily brainwash back if you really want to. Like, seriously? But then again, this coworker is also pretty religious, and he probably doesn't want to give that grandson the option of being gay. And don't get me wrong in the slightest. We get along great, but that was just kind of the one moment I realized that he's tolerant of me, but it's hard to say if he's necessarily accepting. I figured that was an important thing to talk about is I'm sure there are people out there that very much think the same way as he did. And honestly, if you're getting brainwashed, there are so many other more overt ways to be able to do it with. Very last thing I wanted to mention is something that took me completely by surprise. So, if you're watching this channel, you'll know that the next book I'm doing a review of is Gone with the Wind. Because this thing is a cinder block, I'm making mini reviews out of all the necessary parts of the book. Well, there is a section in the book where sister-in-laws are living with each other when one of them is insanely happy that they are pregnant. And it was just the weirdest thing. This is the first time in my life I ever felt a little bit of womb envy. Which is really weird for me because I just don't get the point of kids. I mean, I've seen a lot of babies in my time. It seems like everybody has a baby. It's like, oh, you gotta see the baby. Take a look at the cute little baby. Oh, look at him. He's so cute. For me, I'm just like, eh. Honestly, I find puppies a lot cuter than human babies. The only baby I could at least tolerate was my nephew. But I think maybe that's just because he was family, but I don't find babies cute. And the idea of being stuck with something that you're going to have to raise for a good 18 years, paying for everything along the way, it's not something I'm into. But for that brief moment in time, I read this passage and I'm like, I wish I could get pregnant. And I'm like, what is wrong with me? Because in all honesty, every time I ever think about pregnancy, all I can think about is the famous chestburster scene from Alien. You just have a foreign object slowly growing within you, and then you have to somehow figure out how to get it out. No, thank you. I don't want it. At least I don't think I want it. I had it in that brief moment, but my hormone levels have just been all over the place since August that sometimes even my sexuality seems to go with my emotions with the wind. I mean, all the time, I very much am attracted to women, but then there are a few times where I'm just like, hey, you know, there are some men out there that are not so bad, and it's all over the place, and I very much hope to get these hormones under control because my emotions are just as volatile at times. So yes, thank you for joining me on this surprisingly long video about this month's progress. If there's anything else you'd like to discuss, feel free to leave a comment down below. And as always, please, no discussions of politics. It is just way too inflammatory of a subject these days, and quite frankly, I do not want to put out any more fires. Until next time, be yourself. No matter who that is.